In the fall of 2022, law enforcement in Joaquin, Texas were asked to perform a welfare check at the mobile home of 36-year-old Sarah Hobson. Alan Price and Teresa Louvier had gone into the sheriff's office claiming that a man named Ethan Myers had done something to Hobson. The duo reported that Hobson and Myers, who were believed to have been in a relationship, had spent the night at their residence on Country Road 3635. The following morning, Hobson was gone and Myers was acting strange and appeared to have blood on him. Officers went to Hobson's home and found her body wrapped in a carpet in the middle of her bedroom. She'd been bludgeoned to death as indicated by the large wounds on the side of her head and forehead. Her severed fingers, toes and ears had been placed into a plastic freezer bag and stuffed between her legs. Cleaning supplies were observed inside the room along with paint brushes and paint cans. There was also an odor of fresh paint inside the room. As they waited for the release of an arrest warrant for 26-year-old Myers, the man's mother went to the sheriff's office. She reported that her son had confessed that Hobson wanted him to sacrifice her to Satan and that he'd obeyed her wishes. Myers' mother also told the police that Ethan hears voices and is satanic, adding that he was hiding in the woods to avoid capture. He was eventually taken into custody and a search of his vehicle produced, among other items, a shovel and a rock, the shape of which matched the injuries on Hobson's head. Price and Louvier confirmed that Myers took part in satanic cult activity, but they were arrested as well, with evidence indicating that they'd initially tried to conceal Hobson's murder by painting the room where she was killed. Investigators found traces of fresh paint on Price's pant leg, and a brown Dodge truck registered to Louvier was discovered at the scene of the murder. Myers was indicted by a Shelby County grand jury for first-degree murder on December the 5th of 2022. In February of 2023, Price and Louvier were indicted for murder and tampering with evidence. Number 6. Andrei Gorbatayuk. 27-year-old tattoo artist Tatiana Podvashcheskaya was found dead in her apartment in Ukraine's Ternopil Oblast region in the spring of 2019. Her mutilated remains were discovered by the owner of her apartment. The woman had a knife sticking out of her midsection after she'd been stabbed multiple times, and she also had fresh bite marks to her neck. The authorities learned that she'd recently been visited by 26-year-old Andrei Gorbatayuk, a client whom she hadn't seen in several years. The man had become locally known after he'd extensively modified his appearance to look more like a demon with Podvashchekaya's help. Gorbatayuk had magnets implanted under his skin so he could wear horns, and also had a split tongue, vampire fangs, pointed ears, and spikes on the back of his neck. Additionally, Podvashchekaya had tattooed his eyes black. The police believe that on the night of April the 15th, he went to Podvashchekaya's home, presumably under the guise of getting more work done. He at some point attacked the artist with a knife. Blood splatter indicated that the victim, a karate practitioner, had tried to fight him off but was eventually incapacitated after Gorbatayuk had stabbed her several times in the abdomen. It wasn't clear at which point he'd sunk his teeth into her neck. The suspect then went home where he confessed to his mother, "I killed Tatiana Podvashchekaya." The woman subsequently reported him to the authorities. Gorbatayuk changed his clothes, took a few $100s from the house, and then went on the run, but was eventually found in Lviv and taken into custody. Gorbatayuk told investigators that he couldn't remember how Podvashchekaya had been stabbed because he was intoxicated on drugs. When asked if he repented, the suspect reportedly told the police, "Repent is too weak a word for this." During Gorbatayuk's remand hearing, Podvashchekaya's grieving husband, Ruslan Podvashchetsky, rushed towards the glass court cage where the accused killer was held. 3 police officers prevented Ruslan from reaching Gorbatayuk, and he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Gorbatayuk was ordered to be detained for 2 months while the investigation continued. Number 5. Edward ONeill. On January the 15th of 2016, Texas teenager Ryan Roberts was reported missing by his mother, and within days his body was found in a wooded area near his home. He'd been stabbed to death, and the police determined that the main suspect was his friend, 18-year-old Edward ONeill. They were reported to have been close, and ONeill had even lived in the victim's home for a few months. ONeill was described as a devil worshipper, and Roberts' mother later claimed that her son was killed as part of a satanic ritual. Between January the 21st and February the 10th, ONeill confessed to killing Roberts 3 times, first to a relative then to law enforcement in a voluntary statement, and again after being read his Miranda rights. ONeill's satanic beliefs were known to his family, and his father told the media in the aftermath, "Oh, I know that he's worshipping the devil and stuff," but the man denied having had any knowledge of the murder. Following an assessment, ONeill was determined to have mental health problems in the form of a schizoaffective disorder, thus prevented a trial, and he was placed with the competent authorities. He admitted being a devil worshipper but denied murdering Roberts and blamed another friend. In June of 2020, a felony mental health court judge cut his bail in half from $50,000, and he managed to secure it, thereby leading to his release. Reacting to the decision, crime victims advocate Andy Kahan told the media, "I have never seen a lower bond for first-degree murder than I have in this particular case, and that really flummoxed me." Within months of his release, ONeill would be accused of murder once more. On November the 28th of 2020, ONeill allegedly gunned down 39-year-old Derek Mike in the parking lot of a Houston apartment complex. Mike, who was identified as the ex-boyfriend of ONeill's cousin, had come to collect some of his belongings when he was shot dead. ONeill had reportedly acted under orders from his cousin. He was consequently jailed without bond. Number 4. Oscar Adrian Solis. In May of 2023, Florida State Attorney Bruce Bartlett announced that his office would be seeking the death penalty for Oscar Adrian Solis, an MS-13 gang member accused of gruesomely murdering Uber Eats driver Randall Cook. As the case's legal proceedings unfolded, Bartlett told the media that he'd never seen a more gruesome killing, while in reference to Solis, he was quoted as saying, "I cannot focus on how an individual can be so vile." As reported by the Tampa Bay Times, Cook was delivering food to Solis's address in Holiday on the evening of April the 19th. Solis was caught on CCTV pulling the 59-year-old delivery driver into his home. Without any discernible reason, he then stabbed Cook nearly 36 times. After killing him, Solis decapitated and further dismembered the body. He was seen dumping the remains with an accomplice, and among the subsequently retrieved body parts was a human foot wearing a black sock. Commenting on the killing, Pasco County Sheriff Chris Noko stated, "You always say the word evil, but this is demonic. Infamous for the cruelty and the propensity towards violence of its members, MS-13 is known to have roots in Satanism, as evident from the tattoos, clothing, gang signs, and nicknames of those affiliated with it. The gang's devil horns hand sign is known as La Garra, a Spanish reference to Satan's claws." Members were quoted as saying they felt that Satan helped them or demanded things from them. Formed in LA in the 1980s by immigrants from El Salvador, MS-13 grew to have tens of thousands of members across the world. The devil-worshipping aspect, accompanied by the gang's extreme brutality, only added to its fearsome reputation. In 2022, El Salvador called a state of emergency after the group murdered 62 victims in a bloody gang war in a single day. In May of 2023, 30-year-old Solis was indicted for first-degree murder and abuse of a dead human body. Seeking the death penalty in his case was justified by the aggravated factors surrounding the killing of Cook, which included that it had been carried out in an especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel manner. His next court date was set for the midsummer of 2023. Solis had a criminal history that featured multiple instances of violence. Prior to moving to Florida, he spent 4 years in an Indiana prison for assault and burglary, while his rap sheet also included stabbing a fellow inmate. Number 3. Musa Abid. London teenager Momin Settar was fatally stabbed at his Wembley home on October the 15th of 2016. His younger sisters heard screams coming from his room and then saw a man named Musa Abid leaving the house while laughing and holding a bloody kitchen knife behind his back. 18-year-old Settar, who was reported as being Abid's cousin and only friend, was found with several deadly stab wounds to the chest. In the killing's aftermath, Abid went to his father's home in Golders Green, where he changed his clothes. The following morning, he was found by local police in Northolt, sitting on a bench next to a church with a knife hidden up his sleeve. He was taken into custody. A search of the man's home in de Havilland Close produced documents which indicated that he'd been interested in the Illuminati and devil worship. Investigators also recovered a rambling letter to Satan in which Abid had expressed his murderous intentions and vowed to follow through on them. The killer, who'd been diagnosed with autism and paranoid schizophrenia, pleaded guilty to manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility. In June of 2017, he was given an indefinite hospital order. In the years that followed, he escaped from custody twice, causing public safety concerns. The latest incident occurred in April of 2023 when Abid fled while on escorted leave to a newsagent in Uxbridge Road. The police released CCTV footage of the 26-year-old and advised members of the public not to approach him. He was eventually spotted in North Holt on the morning of April the 15th, taken into custody and returned to the hospital. Number 2. Caius Vives. In September of 2011, the dismembered bodies of 3 men were found buried in Beckett, Massachusetts, roughly 10 days after they'd gone missing. The victims were identified as 44-year-old David Glasser, along with Edward Frampton and Robert Chadwell, aged 58 and 47 respectively. Subsequent investigations would reveal that Glasser was set to testify against Adam Lee Hall, a reported member of the Hells Angels biker gang, in an assault case. The authorities would find that Hall, at the time in his mid-30s, elicited the help of David Chalou and self-proclaimed Satanist Caius Vives in kidnapping the trio in the early hours of August the 28th of 2011. They were subsequently executed by their abductors, with Glasser being the target, while the other 2 were killed for being witnesses to his murder. Hall, Chalou, and Vives were tried separately and each denied multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and witness intimidation. They were each handed 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Vives, the last of them to be sentenced, told the court that he'd been offered a plea deal for conspiracy after the fact, which would have seen him given a 7-year sentence. However, the man claimed that he'd rather remain in prison for the rest of his life than admit to something he hadn't done. When his verdict was pronounced in 2014, after 6 days of deliberations, 34-year-old Vives shouted at the jury, "I'll see you all in hell," before leaving the courtroom. Born Roy Gutfinski Jr., he'd legally changed his name in 2008. Media attention regarding the triple murder had been focused on Vives because of his appearance, as he had subdermal horn implants, self-mutilation, facial scars, spikes in his nose, and the number 666 tattooed on his forehead, but also due to his past crimes. In 1999, Vives and his teenage girlfriend, Deanne Jones, lured a female teenager to their hotel room, where the latter cut her back with a razor blade, inflicting a 7-inch gash. As reported by MassLive.com, Jones and Vives then licked her blood as they kissed each other. The gruesome assault was discovered after the teenager went to hospital, where she needed 30 stitches to mend her wound. During the trial that followed, Vives claimed he was a Satanist and a bloodthirsty vampire. He and Jones were convicted of elevated aggravated assault and reckless conduct. If you didn't see our video about 7 men who went after their mistress, then be sure to stay tuned after number 1 if you'd like to watch that one as well. Number 1. Miguel Alvarez Flores and Diego Hernandez Rivera. On February the 16th of 2017, about a month after she'd been reported missing, the body of teenager Genesis Corneo Alvarado was found in southwest Houston. She'd been fatally shot and then dumped in the middle of the road. Following an investigation, the authorities learned that she'd been one of 3 young, impressionable female teenagers to have been kidnapped by MS-13 gang members Miguel Alvarez Flores, also known as Diabolico, and Diego Hernandez Rivera, who went by the nickname Scary. One of the teens, who'd managed to escape her captors, subsequently gave the police an account of what had happened to Corneo Alvarado. The witness reported that for a month she and Corneo Alvarado had been forced to take drugs and were repeatedly abused by the 2 gang members. At some point, Corneo Alvarado either criticized or struck a shrine in the home, a statue to a satanic saint to which the gang members referred as the Beast. Alvarez Flores reportedly wanted to give the statue a cigarette as a peace offering, but then claimed that the Beast wanted his soul. Corneo Alvarado was executed with 2 close-range gunshots. After escaping, the witness led the police to the kidnappers and they were arrested. The gang members were illegal immigrants, and news of the killing sparked outrage, particularly in the context of then-President Donald Trump recently expressing concerns over criminal immigrants entering the United States illegally. Alvarez, Flores, and Hernandez Rivera generated further public outcry when they smiled and waved to news cameras during their arraignment. In May of 2021, they were each sentenced to 40 years in prison after pleading guilty to Corneo Alvarado's murder. Hernandez Rivera was given an additional 12 years to run concurrently with his sentence for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Number 7. Alonso Dargan Jr. On October the 15th of 2021, law enforcement in Troup County, Georgia, responded to reports of a car crash on Highway 18. They found 29-year-old Akila Weir unresponsive in her Honda Accord after it had been slammed into a tree. Upon further examination of the scene, law enforcement discovered that Weir had been shot multiple times through the vehicle. She passed away from her injuries in a Columbus area hospital while 33 weeks pregnant with her 6th child, who also didn't survive. What was initially suspected to have been a case of road rage was eventually investigated as a targeted murder. The gunman was identified as 30-year-old Alonso Dargan Jr., an active-duty Army sergeant stationed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. He was married with children and had been having an affair with Weir, whom he'd reportedly known since childhood. Dargan wasn't a father to any of her other children, but she'd become pregnant with his child during their tryst, and it was suspected that he'd killed her to prevent the extramarital relationship from being exposed. Dargan, who'd served in Afghanistan and had received multiple commendations during his military career, was in Troup County at the time of the murder, and he drove a silver Nissan, which had been spotted at the scene. He was arrested and charged with murder, feticide, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime, with his court appearance scheduled for the fall of 2022. Number 6. Gerald Michael Bollinger. After the death of her husband, Utah woman Naja Medley started dating commercial pilot Michael Bollinger in the mid-2010s. By all accounts, the relationship was promising, and Bollinger became a father figure for the woman's teenage daughter, Peyton. He took her on hikes, taught her how to shoot and wrestle, and she reportedly started calling him Dad. As she and her mother struggled financially, Bollinger moved both to a farm he'd bought in Caldwell, Idaho, in the spring of 2017. Naja, then in her late 40s, shared her excitement about the move on social media. She'd go on to post photos and videos with Bollinger, her daughter, and of their seemingly idyllic life together on the rural property. Then on June the 8th, they received an unexpected visit from a woman by the name of Cheryl Baker. The 57-year-old had been married to Bollinger since 2010 and had bought the farm with him. She remained in Ogden, Utah to sell their home while Bollinger claimed he was doing maintenance work on the farmhouse. Baker had recently retired from her job as a school teacher and had decided to surprise her husband by making the drive to Caldwell weeks earlier than they'd planned. It was subsequently determined that Baker and Medley didn't know each other and were stunned to learn about Bollinger's double life. What followed hasn't been concretely determined. On June the 19th of 2017, the mother of one of Peyton's friends asked law enforcement to perform a welfare check at the farm because no one had heard from the teen or her mother. As officers reached the scene, they detected a foul smell emanating from a shed, which Naja had at one point mentioned in her social media videos. Upon further investigation, officers discovered 3 partially decomposed bodies, which were later confirmed as Cheryl Baker, Naja, and Peyton. All 3 had been killed via a single gunshot to the head, execution style, and had been dead for at least 10 days. Bollinger, then 60 years old, became the prime suspect in the murder, but he was never found. On July the 12th of 2017, his car was discovered in the Bridgeteton National Forest in Wyoming. The forest measures over 3.4 million acres and is populated by wolves, grizzly bears, and coyotes. The running theory was that Bollinger died either by his own hand, in an animal attack, or from exposure, but no concrete evidence in that regard was found as of the latest updates. Number 5. Rosario D Goralamo. Leading up to the summer of 2007, married New Jersey man Rosario D Goralamo was maintaining 2 households, one with his wife and son in Millstone, as well as another in Hightstown with his mistress, Amy Giordano, and the baby boy he'd had with her. 27-year-old Giordano was reportedly asking for a new apartment and threatened to reveal the affair to D Goralamo's wife. The man had reportedly become strained by what he'd perceived as financial pressure from his mistress. They argued in June of 2007, and the computer analyst, then in his 30s, fatally struck Giordano in the head with a hammer. He then dismembered her body with a hacksaw, placed her remains in a suitcase, and dumped them in a New York City pond with the help of his longtime friend, Staten Island man John Russo. In the murder's aftermath, Di Girolamo abandoned the couple's 11-month-old son in the parking lot of a Delaware hospital. The child, Michael, was safely recovered by a nurse, and relatives who recognized him from TV news reports came to learn Giordano was missing. By then, Di Girolamo had quit his job, abandoned his other family, and fled to Italy, where he remained for about 2 months. He eventually returned to face child abandonment charges in Delaware, to which he pleaded guilty. Giordano's body still hadn't been found by March of 2008, when Di Girolamo was returned to New Jersey and charged with her murder. Within days, Russo was also arrested and charged with tampering with evidence. He agreed to testify against Di Girolamo and led the authorities to the pond, where they found a suitcase containing a torso that was confirmed as Giordano's. Di Girolamo's legal defense maintained that his crime had been one of sudden passion and that he hadn't meant to kill his mistress. A judge would reject that argument after evidence indicated Di Girolamo had searched for lethal karate blows to the back of the head online 2 days before the murder. In light of the evidence, Di Girolamo struck a deal and pleaded guilty to aggravated manslaughter, for which he was sentenced to 25 years in prison with a minimum of 21 years served in 2011. Number 4. Abdul Salam Gunay. Turkish man Abdul Salam Gunay met up with 30-year-old Didem Mengu, a woman who'd been his mistress for nearly 10 years, on the evening of December the 9th of 2019 at her home in Istanbul. They drank alcohol and had intercourse. A heated argument erupted during the rendezvous after Gunay had reportedly called Mengu by his wife's name while in bed with her. Gunay would later tell law enforcement that he got really angry during the row and struck Mengu in the head with a cobblestone before strangling her. Upon realizing she was dead, the father of two fled the scene in Mengu's car, but later returned to the apartment, placed her body in a suitcase, and kept her phone. The Anatolian 16th High Criminal Court found him guilty of deliberate killing, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Number 3. Larry Dunn. Texas man Larry Dunn, a married father, met 28-year-old Cicely Bolden through a dating app in 2012, and they soon started having intimate relations. A few weeks into the affair, Bolden told Dunn during a phone conversation that she was HIV positive. Dunn believed that he'd contracted the virus, and about a week after the reveal, returned to Bolden's Oak Cliff apartment with what he'd later claimed was an intention to slap her around a little bit. However, upon arriving at her home, they had unprotected intercourse once more. Dunn became enraged when the woman reportedly brought up the HIV conversation again. He grabbed a steak knife from the kitchen, concealed it in his pocket, and went to lie beside her in bed. Dunn then stabbed her in the neck twice, later telling the police that Bolden only saw the knife when it was sticking out of her throat. He abandoned her bloodied, half-naked body in bed to be found by her children. Law enforcement learned from the victim's friends and family that she'd been seeing Dunn and arrested him as a person of interest. He initially denied any involvement with the murder, but then admitted that he'd been in an intimate relationship with Bolden. After the police found blood in his car, Dunn confessed to the murder in a video-recorded interview. He told detectives, "In my mind, I'm already dead," adding, "She killed me, so I killed her." Preliminary tests found that he hadn't been infected with HIV. His defense tried to argue that he'd acted in sudden passion, which would have seen him serve anywhere from 2 to 20 years, but he was ultimately given a 40-year sentence. Number 2. Eric Charles Maund. On March the 12th of 2020, Holly Williams and William Lanway, both in their 30s, were found dead in a crashed car at a construction site in Nashville, Tennessee. They'd been gunned down, and an investigation revealed a complex murder-for-hire conspiracy, at the center of which sat an automotive magnate by the name of Eric Charles Maund. The married 46-year-old based in Austin, Texas, would reportedly have relations with Williams during his visits to Nashville. Lanway, whom sources described as Williams' boyfriend, became aware of the affair and texted Maund, threatening to expose it unless he was paid off. The mistress's degree of involvement in the extortion attempt remained unclear. Roughly 11 days later, however, she and Lanway would be shot dead. Upon receiving the threats, Maund reached out to fellow Austin man Gilad Peled. He presented himself as a former Mossad agent and a former member of the Israeli Defense Forces, but only the latter was confirmed. He ran the company Spear Tip Security, which stated one of its specializations as responding to extortion demands. Peled contracted Brian Brockway and Adam Carey, two former members of the Marine Corps, with a background in special operations. Wire transfers indicated that Maund had paid the trio over $750,000 to kidnap and murder Williams and Lanway for their extortion attempts. Brockway and Carey conducted in-person surveillance of the victims and submitted intelligence reports to Peled on March the 5th and 9th, with the latter concluding that Lanway was living at Williams' residence. 2 days later, communication between Maund and Peled, carried out through email, cell phone, and encrypted messaging apps, indicated that they discussed the kidnapping and murder. Then on the 12th, Brockway and Carey shot Lanway multiple times, including twice in the head, as they ambushed the couple in the parking lot of Williams' apartment building. The former Marines kidnapped the woman and drove her to the construction site with Lanway's lifeless body, where they killed her in similar fashion. Maund's connection to the plot was revealed after he'd left a glowing online review of Spear Tip, praising their speed of execution and professionalism. All four men were arrested in December of 2021 and subsequently indicted on multiple charges in connection to the double murder. As of December of 2022, Peled pleaded guilty to the charges of murder for hire, conspiracy to kidnap with death resulting, and kidnapping resulting in death. His sentencing was scheduled for April of 2023, while Maund and the others were still pending trial. Number 1. Timothy Bramer. 41-year-old English nurse Claire Parry was killed by her lover, Dorset Police Constable Timothy Bramer, on May the 9th of 2020. At the time of the incident, Parry, a mother of two, had been Bramer's mistress for roughly 10 years, while he was still married to his wife of 14 years, Martha, a detective on the same force. In the weeks leading up to the incident, Parry had contacted one of Bramer's former lovers, 35-year-old Detective Constable Kate Rhodes, on Facebook. Rhodes, who'd ended her tryst with Bramer years prior upon finding out he was married, would later describe him in court as a groomer who has a toolkit he uses on every woman he encounters. Others on the force reportedly knew he was a womanizer, but his charming persona and the fact he was well-liked led to his sins being overlooked. Through their talks on social media, Parry and Rhodes determined that he had other lovers in the emergency services. Parry, whose relationship with Bramer had led to the end of her marriage, told Rhodes that she'd be embarking on a campaign to ensure the man's long and slow downfall. It would reportedly involve telling his wife that he was unfaithful, referring him to a police watchdog, and reporting him to the tax authorities for failing to declare a second income he got from doing odd jobs. On May the 9th, Martha believed that her husband was out buying some steaks, but he'd actually met with Parry in the parking lot of the Horns Inn pub in Dorset. They argued in his car, and Parry asked for his phone to check if he'd been seeing someone else. She instead used it to message Martha, "I'm cheating on you." A fight erupted in the vehicle that ended with Bramer breaking his mistress's neck in 3 places. CCTV caught him walking shoeless across the car park to the pub entrance, where he sat down, covered in his own blood, and asked a passerby for help. He'd stabbed himself in the forearm 3 times and told the police Parry had attacked him, a statement which he eventually recanted. Body cam footage, which was subsequently played in court, would show a shirtless Bramer crying while receiving treatment in the ambulance. It later claimed that Parry's death had been an accident caused by him leaning on her neck while trying to force her out of the car after she'd refused to leave. The 40-year-old was found not guilty of murder, but convicted of her manslaughter following a trial at Salisbury Crown Court. His jail term, which was initially 10.5 years, was found too lenient by the Court of Appeals, which increased the sentence by 3 years in March of 2021. Thanks for watching. Would you rather attend an exorcism or be in the gallery during the administration of a lethal injection? Let us know in the comments section below.